Right, everyone, welcome back. And we are very luckily joined today by a legend of the fight game, a man whose fights I certainly grew up watching. And even though he may have no gas at the moment, he is very luckily joining us here. So we'll have to try and gas him up as best we can. But look, Dan, how you doing today, man?
I'm good, guys. Aside from being a bit cold, a good conversation always warms me up. It's a pleasure to talk to you
Exactly.
guys.
Well, it's a pleasure
Pleasure.
for us to talk to Dan Hardy. So, look, Dan, I want to get straight into it. And my first question for you is about Impa Kasanganay. Do you think Impa is the perfect representation that a fighter can leave the UFC and it doesn't mean that their career is over? When you look at what Impa's achieved, not just financially, but becoming, a respected and well-known fighter in the sport, do you think he's the perfect example that one can leave the UFC and still have a successful career?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've got a few good examples. Olivier Mercier being another one of them. A guy that went on to win the championship twice. I think the reason why Impa sticks out in people's mind is because the highlight reel knockout that he suffered against Buckley.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like I mean, and I've been on the end of that against Condit. It's almost like, well, that's the lowest point in your career because you've just been knocked out live on TV in a spectacular way, and now you've got so far to build back up to, even a level playing field in the fans' eyes. And I think because he had that knockout in his UFC career, and then he's gone on to, move over to PFL, move up a weight class, win a world championship, and now obviously he's challenging the Bellator middleweight champ. So, like, he's just gone from strength to strength. But the thing is, if you talk to Impa, he's got a strength of mind that very, very few people have got. I
Mm.
mean, he lives in a yurt, he drives around on his Triumph motorbike. He's always got his training stuff in his bag. He lives a life of like a studious martial arts monk. So,
Yeah.
I mean, his success is his own, but certainly the PFL's platform has allowed him to find that success outside the UFC.
What's up, guys? It's Josh here from the stands. And look, I know you're in the middle of a good little interview that we're currently doing, but I want to take a second of your time just to give a quick little shout out to today's sponsor, TrainAid. Obviously, they're big supporters of us, like we are of them. And today they're sponsoring this video. And look, I want to let you guys know about a little product they do, their premium product, TrainAid Hydration. It's the best hydration formula on the market, guys. I'm not gonna lie to you. And look, if you don't believe me, ask guys like Israel Adesanya, Alexander Volkanovski, Leon Edwards. You ever heard of these guys? I mean, they're the top athletes in the world. And they're all taking TrainAid Hydration. It really is the #1 formula in the world for hydration. And in the summer months here in Australia, I mean, it's something that I think everyone should be taking. And TrainAid have been very nice to give us a discount code, a very healthy discount code as well. I mean, it's a nice little discount code. If you use the code FTS15 at the checkout, they will give you 15% off. We'll leave a link to their website in this description of this video. And yeah, check them out, guys. Please support them because they are supporting us. Cheers.
Definitely. Dan, I know there are talks about PFL Australia looking to be a plan with over the next, year or two. I guess I think it's massive for PFL to be coming into this market, especially down here where we have guys that have consistently always gone to the UFC now have a chance to be, snatched by the PFL instead and go down that pathway as well. What are your thoughts, I guess, on PFL eventually coming to Australia and being able to secure, those talents earlier and really creating a separate pathway to the UFC like they have done with PFL Europe?
I think it's essential. And what I've been learning from, since we started PFL Europe last year, the thing I've learned is that there are so many fighters and not enough shows.
Yeah.
And that's in Europe where we do have plenty of shows popping up all the time. Like over where you guys are in Australia, you're quite isolated, really. A lot of your fighters have to go into Asia to get action, which is good for them because there's lots of fights in Asia and lots of good money and exposure there. But the bad thing is they're not fighting on home soil and building their brand in front of their fans. And really, that's what the PFL fans in Europe want. I have some guys that want to come back from America to fight over here for their fans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, what the PFL is going to bring around the world as we move in and open up new regions is a stability, right? That's my main focus right now in Europe. Build stability so these fighters have got consistency in competition. They're making enough money to support themselves without having other jobs, and then they can chase the big money, because that's the way that PFL structure things. Everyone's got access to that big pot of cash. And I think a local league allows for the level to find itself so the champions in the region can emerge much quicker. That's something else I think we'll see. You've got tremendous talent in Australia and all around the smaller islands as well that it's probably not getting the exposure that it deserves. We've had some real savages come out of that area of the world, and I know there's a lot more to be tapping into. So when we build a platform for them, I think the world will realize a lot more that you guys have got a lot more to offer the MMA world than you already are, which is already considerable.
Yeah, for sure. So Dan, obviously, the PFL versus Bellator Champions card is coming up, with a fight that has incredibly high stakes at middleweight between Impa Kasanganay and Johnny Eblen. And whilst I'm sure, we're going to see a classic Dan Hardy breakdown potentially from the War Room for that. But, I was just wondering, what are your early thoughts on that fight?
The thing with Impa is, especially at light heavyweight, he had speed and footwork was his advantage. Now, obviously, he's moving down to middleweight. Johnny Eblen is a very quick, agile athlete. We saw what he did to Fabian, even though that fight wasn't necessarily going his way, to be able to turn it around as quickly as he can like that. The thing with Eblen, you've always got to be aware that there's a level change, and if he gets his hands on you, you might not be able to get any space. So that draws so much of your attention that you can overlook the big punches coming over the top, right? Yeah. Like if he can squeeze Impa up against the fence and take away some of his footwork, then Impa has to rely on his hand speed, which is not necessarily the advantage that it was at light heavyweight, right? He's not going to be as fast as these middleweights compared to I know you look at some of the guys that Impa fought, the likes of Martin Hamler, he was huge, right? You can see the speed advantage there for Impa. But then I would say that's going to level out the closer he gets to people naturally to his weight. And I would say Eblen is that athlete. So it's a battle of ranges. Impa's got to be on his toes. He's got to be fighting behind his long range punches and trying to look at his opportunities to, hold the center best he can. For Eblen, he's got to take his space away, right? He's got to keep showing him that level change, threatening the wrestling, and then start coming over the top with those bombs that we know he's got. Because even if he doesn't land a knockout shot, it's going to set up a level change much easier than just shooting it cold. It's a fascinating fight. And honestly, although Impa won the belt at light heavyweight, I still feel like his best years of his career are going to be at middleweight. He's going to be an absolute terror there when he finds that balance of his technical prowess and his speed. He's going to be a real problem.
100%. Dan, it'd be remiss of you if I didn't ask you about something that was pretty big in the news last week. Obviously, Kayla Harrison signing with the UFC. I did not see that coming at all. But now that it's happened and it's been announced, I guess, what did you make of her signing with the UFC? And is, in your opinion, do you think Holly is kind of the perfect opponent for someone, for Kayla to test herself against, considering Holly has seen every style of fighter. She's fought everyone. Is that the right person for her to make her debut against?
Absolutely, I think so. Especially given the fact that Kayla's going down to bantamweight. You know what I mean? You kind of need to that's one of the two tests for Kayla stepping into the UFC. I'm really happy for her. Her career we always really, in my mind, needed that validation of stepping into the UFC and going down to bantamweight, really, if she wants to be considered the greatest. Now she's got an opportunity to fight a former UFC champion. Was she a two-weight champion? Did she win featherweight? No, she didn't. Did she?
She fought Durandamy, but I think she lost.
Yeah, she lost to Durandamy.
I think the key here is that she was the one that beat Ronda, and Ronda was the judo player, and then Kayla's the judo player. So we're kind of getting that fight again, but obviously without Ronda being in the cage. Kayla's a phenomenal athlete. She's a scary individual, but I do feel like, especially if she can get to the bantamweight comfortably, she is in a position where she can just walk through this bantamweight division. No disrespect to anybody in the bracket right now, but since Nunes has left, I do feel like the standard is lower than it has been over recent years. And with Kayla stepping in, the right timing, if she runs through Holly Holm like she has the capability of doing, I don't see anybody else standing in her way. It's going to be a veteran like Holly Holm that's got footwork, good boxing, good side kicks, smart takedown defense that's going to be problematic for Kayla. I'm sure Holly Holm's looking at Kayla's last fight against Aspen Ladd and thinking, yeah, I can handle this, absolutely. But then we're looking at an entirely different weight class for Kayla this time around. She's going to be a lot quicker at bantamweight. I'm excited for her. And same thing for MVP as well. As much as I would love to have seen him on a PFL or a Bellator card, selfishly as an MMA fan, I want to see him in there in that mix with the top welterweights in the UFC. So I'm happy for him as well. It's I'm a PFL guy, but I'm an MMA fan, and I want to see these fights.
Of course.
Yeah, for sure. So Dan, we've spoken to your partner Veronica in the past, and she's of course forging her own MMA career path right now. I'm curious for you, as someone who is a lifelong martial artist and someone who's competed at the highest level, knowing how brutal this sport can be and also having that experience, does it allow you to manage your nerves better when Veronica's getting into the cage, or does having that experience for how brutal this sport can be make it harder to manage your nerves?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, it's just very different. It's just very, very different. Like whenever I was cornering a teammate, it was always, well, we're doing the same thing. I know what you're willing to sacrifice to get in there, so go and do it. It's do or die. That was always the mentality I got in there with, and it was kind of the roughhouse mentality. All my teammates were like, we're coming out of this with the win or nothing. But in this scenario, of course, like she's my wife as well. She's my best friend. So like there is an element of protectiveness that I have to kind of negotiate with all the way through training camp and fight. Like putting grease on her face before sparring so she doesn't get cut is not something that most husbands would want to be doing for a wife. But she's chasing a dream, and I'm fortunate to be in a position where I can share the journey with her and I can help her in some way. Managing the nerves, though, I think is a challenge for both of us. This is different territory for me. I've had two fights as a husband now, and fortunately we've had 2 wins, and we're on track. But yeah, absolutely, it just feels very, very different. And when we were on the card in March, I spoke to John Wood, who was there with Joanne Calderwood. And we had a little joke about it, kind of like team husband, but there was a moment there where we kind of looked at each other like, dude, this is not nice. This is really difficult, So yeah, I feel for people in these situations with partners that are in the cage fighting, or even different. You look at someone like Frank Mir, who's cornering his daughter Bella. I mean, she's an absolute monster, but I still can't imagine that kind of pressure.
No, of course, 100%. Dan, a few weeks ago, Don Davis came out on the MMA Hour and talking to Ariel, and Ariel sort of posed the question that if the Saudis wanted to co-promote, is that something, with the UFC that the PFL would entertain? And Don said, he would entertain that, of course. Being a guy that has, been in the UFC, now obviously working with the PFL, knowing both sides of the spectrum, I guess, if the Saudis did want that, is that something that you think we could ever see from the UFC's perspective, or is there not enough really to gain from the UFC's point of view, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's always the question, is what does the UFC gain from it? And I think, whenever they've done things in the past where they've taken a champion to a different organization, like when they took Chuck over to Pride or whatever, it didn't really ever work out very well for the UFC. Even taking McGregor over to fight Mayweather in boxing, although it made him a lot of money in the immediate, I think it kind of slowed down the UFC as a promotion as a whole by sidelining McGregor for that period of time. I think the UFC, particularly Dana's always going to be resistant to it because he's very protective of the UFC brand. And of course, he wants to control entirely of his promotion. But I was at the AJ Ngannou press conference the other day, and you've got Frank Warren sitting on stage.
With Eddie
and like it didn't even seem like it was discussed. Like Turki Al-Sheikh just took the mic and he was like, and I want to do a Eddie Hearn versus Frank Warren boxing show, and now it's happening. So like I don't know now, honestly. I mean, like the guys in the Middle East have got mad money and they've got crazy ambitions. Like the arenas that they're building, that like I just found out they've put a football pitch in the Kingdom Arena where the Ngannou Fury fight was. Like, wow, that's wild. Like I watched it on his Instagram, and they've got like people laying out the turf that they've grown elsewhere, and they've got like heat lamps on it and stuff. It's wow. I just think we're in a time now where anything's possible. And I think that, the further the UFC becomes a public company and a big, publicly traded company, a publicly shared company, I think that these possibilities will open up. Money talks, and there's a lot of money in that area of the world, and they have massive ambitions. Yeah. And, even Oscar De La Hoya is going to get involved soon. I've seen him at Turkey as well. So I don't know. If you'd have asked me a year ago, I'd have said, no, I don't think it would ever happen. But given what's happened in the last 12 months, I'm starting to believe that it's possible.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Dan, look, last couple of questions from us. Last one from me anyway. certainly one of the fights I think this year that has the potential to have one of the more devastating finishes on the PFL and Bellator card is Yoel Romero and Thiago Santos. And, certainly Yoel's ability, to still compete at this level relative to his age makes him, such a unique fighter. But do you think he's arguably one of the best athletes that we've ever seen inside of MMA, given his ability to still go at this age and compete at a high level?
Absolutely, I think he is. I mean, he's an absolute freak of an athlete, and it's incredible to watch what he can do, especially at the age that he's at. And then when the doctors were talking about the ligaments and tendons in his eyeballs and stuff,
Yeah.
I mean, he is a prototype of a human being, isn't he? He could potentially be the future stage of evolution that we're looking at right now. He's an incredible athlete, and to be able to fight into his 40s the way that he is, and still be as scary as he is as well. I mean, this for me is a fascinating fight, right? You've got one guy that went 25 minutes with John Jones with no knees, and you've got another guy that put Luke Rockhold's head through the fence with a shotgun punch. Like this for me is like just kind of a giddy old school MMA kind of vibe. It's got like a pride feeling to it. This one has. Both of these guys are more new school. But Yoel Romero absolutely is a scary individual, and I think we need to do some studies on him when he finally retires.
Yeah,
if we could just give him BJ Penn's jiu-jitsu, can you imagine what kind of MMA fighter we would have?
An all-time great
champion of every weight division.
100%. Well, look, Dan, last question, man. Like you mentioned, you were at the Joshua and Ngannou press conference the other week, and a question I've sort of pondered back in my own head since the fight with Anthony Joshua was announced, is if he puts himself in that position where he defeats Anthony Joshua and then moves on to fight for the undisputed title in boxing, it's pretty hard to argue that he wouldn't be the greatest combat sports star of all time. I mean, you got guys like Henry Cejudo, obviously the Olympics and that sort of stuff, but this would be pretty unprecedented in my mind. I guess, what are your thoughts on that? What's your take? Because it's an incredible feat, and just for someone to go from MMA to boxing, I still can't wrap my head around it, that he could be fighting for the undisputed title.
It's incredible, really. I mean, just the fact that he's created this opportunity for himself is, it puts him head and shoulders above any other combat sport athlete in my mind. And then what he did against Fury.
Yeah.
In the build up to that, I was saying, I feel like AJ is a better matchup for him for a couple of different reasons. One, because he's a bit easier to hit than Fury. I mean, not much, but Fury is very, very tricky. AJ's easier to hit. And I also don't think he takes a punch quite as well. And that's not necessarily taking a punch and being able to recover. That's a mental thing as well. He might have flashbacks of the Ruiz fight if he gets clipped with it by Ngannou and feels unsteady. When he wakes up on the morning, the daunting task that he's got in front of him to take on an 0-1 guy that could potentially beat him. Like, there are lots and lots of things that are stacking in Ngannou's favor. And I feel like this is a much more winnable fight for him than Fury. So there's no reason why Ngannou couldn't come in and catch AJ, even put him down a couple of times and win on points. Because I'm open to be surprised by Ngannou's conditioning in this one as well, like I was against Fury. And then, to move on to an undisputed, he desperately wants the rematch with Fury. He's told me that himself. He just keeps saying, I want Tyson, I want Fury again, get me Fury again. So that's really what he's motivated for. But if the undisputed belt's on the line as well, if Fury is able to beat Usyk, then it would just be the most incredible combat sports story that we've ever witnessed. I mean, the movies that we're going to get in the future about this, going to be insane, isn't it? I just don't know who you get to play Francis Ngannou. I'm just not quite enough, I don't think. But I'll give it a back.
100%. Dan, look, mate, we'll let you go. But just from Alex and I, we really thank you for your time, mate. You're a guy that we both grew up watching and, followed your career over the course of your fighting career into your analyst career. And it's been an absolute pleasure and honor for us to both chat with you. We'll let you go warm up. But, mate, if you're keen on doing this again, we'd love to absolutely have you on again for a chat down the road. Thank you so much for your time, man.
Absolutely, guys. Let's do this again. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for your kind words. Yeah, we'll do this again. Let's get it done in a few months' time, and we'll have a catch up and touch base again.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you very much, Dan.